AJ Dybantsa has officially verbalized what BYU basketball's whole goal this coming season is, and it shouldn't surprise anybody.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. I'm Jake Hatch, executive producer of the KSL Sports Zone and 13-year credentialed media member at BYU. I am your resident expert and insider as your host here on this podcast. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. All right, coming up on today's show, we're talking some BYU basketball. AJ Dybantsa is with the U.S. men's national U19 team, and it's already verbalized what BYU's whole goal is, and it's to win it all. We'll also talk about two new additions to the BYU football recruiting class, starting off with the commitment that came on Saturday in Antonio Johnson and the one that came on Father's Day in Parker Ord. And that's what we're going to cover ahead on this podcast. All right, so right out of the chute, AJ Dybantsa is already showing out on the international stage. If you did not see it yesterday, he's already working out with the U.S. men's national team U19 squad. He'll be going through a tournament with them this summer, and he figures to be the lead dog. Now, there's some really other talented players on that squad, but he is already showing that he is the alpha of that group. Kristen Peak, who covers the NBA draft, and has a lot of cool coverage of the NBA and its prospects as a whole, essentially said that BYU fans should get excited for this kid because they showed a moment. There was a scrimmage they had where AJ Dybantsa went right to the rim, scored what ended up being the game-winning basket for his team. She said he is going to be a guy to keep an eye on in end-of-game scenarios, and she's right about that. But the bigger thing is Jonathan Givony from ESPN caught up with AJ Dybantsa at this camp. It's taking place in Colorado Springs, and the question was asked, well, what's the goal for the BYU basketball this season? And AJ didn't hesitate at all. It's to win a national championship is what his response was. And he said last year, Coach Young, he led in the Sweet 16. This year, our goal is to go deeper than that. He said it's to win a national title. Now, I don't even remind, I think many of you, that BYU basketball's history in the NCAA tournament, well, they've been to the Sweet 16 3 times in the past 45 years. The deepest they've gone in the tournament is an Elite 8 run by Danny Ainge, obviously back in 1980, and they've never been to a Final Four. They have the ignominious history of being the team that's appeared the most in March Madness without a Final Four berth. Can they accomplish that this season? Well, that's the hope. And if you missed it over the weekend, I actually came out Friday morning. The Big 12, and actually Thursday morning, the Big 12's conference schedule in terms of the opponents each team would face, their basketball matrix was revealed, and BYU has got a lot of high-profile matchups. That just comes with the territory, being a member of the Big 12 conference. That was another thing that AJ talked about. I said the fact that facing off against the likes of Kansas and some of these big teams, every game is a big game in the Big 12. And I think he's right about that. You look at the way the BYU's got their schedule laid out for them. They have a home and homes of 3 teams. Obviously, their arch rival, Utah. That was inevitable. But 2 big home and home series with Arizona and Texas Tech, both of which figure it works to be top 20-ish type teams going into the season and should be in the national rankings most of the season long. At home, BYU will face off against Arizona State, Colorado, Houston, Iowa State, TCU, and UCF. Those will be the home-only games. Obviously, the 2 most notables, speaking of the Houston Cougars and Iowa State, BYU and Houston, the 2 Cougars in the Big 12, are expected to, in many ways, carry the banner this year for the Big 12 Conference, and that home date for BYU against Houston looms extremely large because BYU's history against Houston since joining the league, it's not been a fun one. Now, on the away slate of things, you have Baylor. Robert Wright III playing back in Baylor after spurning the Bears. Okay, that was a very easy, I think, scheduling thing for the Big 12 schedule makers. I also go to Cincinnati, Kansas, and Kansas State. That's 2 really, really interesting games back-to-back there. And then Oklahoma State, and for the 3rd straight year, BYU plays at West Virginia. Don't ask me to explain why BYU can't get a home game against the Mountaineers, but 3 straight years, 3 straight times playing out there at WVU. But I think the bigger point to be made here is a lot of these games are going to be made for TV spectacles. Expect BYU to be in the national spotlight a lot this coming season, and for good reason. You have AJ Dybantsa. You have the Big 12 most improved player and a first-team all-conference player in Richie Saunders as kind of his running mate on the 2 wings for BYU. I already mentioned Robert Wright III. He's expected to be that guy that's initiating the offense. That was another thing that Jonathan Givony's interview kind of revealed about AJ Dybantsa. Is AJ said, I don't have to be the guy who's initiating the offense. We got Robert Wright III for that. That's cool to see him realize that he doesn't have to always be at the controls of this offense. Is AJ going to be at the controls a lot? Absolutely. If he gets a rebound and he feels like he's got the ability to break, he will be carrying the ball down the court, dribbling it, and looking to score immediately. That's just part of, I think, what Kevin Young has installed in this offense. But bigger than that, looking at the schedule here, BYU's got a lot going for it, and it's going to be on national television a lot. The Big 12 schedule lends itself to that, and with the star power that BYU possesses in this lineup, the TV people out there are going to be hard-pressed to put, I think, a bunch of these BYU games on ESPN+, because quite frankly, there's a lot of high-profile matchups that'll be hard to put on a streaming-only platform. You'll see them on ESPN2, ESPN News, CBS Sports, TNT. They're also in the mix this year. There's more areas, or I guess more platforms, I should say, for the Big 12 to place games. And if BYU is truly top 10 at the worst, maybe a top 5 team preseason-wise, yeah, you can figure that having to rely on ESPN Plus for the majority of BYU games, it'll be a bit of a overstatement this year. I think BYU will actually be on network television more than they will be on streaming. Now, could I be wrong about that? Sure, but I really just don't see it. And the way that AJ's talking about, the goal is to win a national title, I think that's music to every Cougar fan's ears. It should be, at least. Let's be real. What else do you want him to say? Well, we're going to see what we can do. They made it to the Sweet 16 last year. We need to go a little bit deeper than that, but no big deal. And the other thing about it is AJ was asked about being the number 1 overall pick next year in the NBA draft. He said, if I win, I will be. He knows. This is, speaking of AJ individually, I didn't mean to make this an AJ segment per se, but the one thing about AJ is he is very self-aware. And it is the orbit that he exists in, this is a kid that is considered by many to be a Carmelo Anthony type, a Kevin Durant, just a singular player. And could he be full of himself and really blow people off more than he does? Yeah, absolutely he could. But to his credit, I think it's the way he was raised, knowing about his dad and his mom and everything. This is a kid, as I mentioned, who is very self-aware. And yes, he knows he's got millions upon millions waiting for him in the professional game. And he's making millions this year playing for BYU basketball via an NIL arrangement. But he understands that the success that he has is a byproduct of making sure that he is a good teammate along the way. And I think that makes him kind of unique in that way, is that he's embraced everything that BYU has and everything it stands for. And he said, you know what? We're going to win along the way. And yes, if I do win, I end up probably being the number 1 overall pick. And that's a cool thing to see him be aware of. I have to have success if I really want to see the success I hope to have as an individual player. And he talked about his goals 5 years now. He wants to be a gold medalist on Team USA in terms of the 2028 Olympics. He also talked about the fact he's looking forward to playing in the league, speaking to the NBA. I love this kid. And I think that his mindset, his perspective, and everything that he has stated for BYU basketball, none of it's out of line. And the nice part is, Cougar fans, get ready. Tickets going to be tough to come by for BYU basketball this year, but it's a hot ticket for a reason, because they should be really, really darn good and should be a fun team to watch play on the court in some of these high-profile non-conference matchups, but also in the Big 12 with, I think, a lot of made-for-TV type spectacles that will be on prominent television networks in prominent time slots, speaking of prime time on the East Coast and the like. All right, coming up next, we're going to talk about 2 prospects that committed from this past recruiting weekend for the BYU football program, both of them from the Lone Star State. We'll go in sequential order of when they committed. We'll talk about Antonio Johnson next. What does this rangy safety bring to the BYU football program? Well, let's just put it this way. I call him a J Hill special. I'll explain what that means next. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Now, Game Time is here for you guys to get you out to the events you want to go to. The NBA playoffs and the finals are ongoing. There's nothing like an NBA playoff game. If you've not experienced it, it's absolutely awesome. And if you have a chance to experience it, I would encourage you to do so. The best part is Game Time makes it easy and fast to get your seats, even for the biggest playoff games. Prices on the app actually go down as tip-off gets closer. And with killer last-minute deals, panoramic seat views, and no surprise fees, Game Time is a total game changer in the ticketing world. The best part part is right now on the app and Zone Deals, we're offering 10% off exclusive Zone Deals for FIFA Club World Cup matches. If you're looking to go out and watch some of the world's best soccer teams here in the USA, take advantage of it today. The best part is you can see your exact fee before you buy. No surprises. That makes it ridiculously simple to buy your tickets. 2 taps and you're done. It's as simple as it can come and be, my friends. So with the Game Time Guarantee, you know you're getting the best deal. If you find a better price in the same row and section, they will credit you 110% of the difference. So you take the guesswork out of buying your tickets and do it with our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app today. Create an account and use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create that account and redeem the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, and of course, it's always guaranteed. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. All right, we're going to talk about BYU football in just a moment, but I had a really cool event over the weekend, and pardon the personal insert here, but I was at my 20-year high school reunion, and quite frankly, I came away from it as like energized as I've been in quite some time. I caught up with some people I literally hadn't seen in 2 decades, high school football teammates of mine, and the best part is, a number of them said they watched the podcast. So I'm giving them a shout out. Matt Stoll, you're the man. Emily, your wife, you guys are absolutely awesome. You're everydayers from what I understand. Daryl Roundy, Evan Astle. Who else? Also Randy Hurd. Sean Jackson. All y'all out there. Don Lovelace. Cannot thank you guys. Have Cameron Later and the Later family apparently watch all the time. His dad, speaking of Cameron's dad. You guys are absolutely awesome. So appreciate catching up with y'all and appreciate you guys supporting the podcast. It was kind of funny to see how many people were like, Jake, it's good to see you actually in person. You know what? Could have called me up. I'll talk with you anytime in person. But it was a really, really cool thing. And it kind of shows the reach that social media and this podcast have. And like I said, it's my own personal orbit. But as always, thank you to all of you for making this podcast truthfully your first listen and or view of the day. It means the world to me that many people found it of worth that, like I said, are high school classmates of mine. All right. That being said, let's talk some BYU football recruiting. Let's get to 2 commitments from this past week. And we'll start off with Antonio Johnson, who committed on Saturday. Now, Antonio Johnson is from Arlington Heights High School down in the Fort Worth area of Texas. And the one thing I know based on what I watch about Antonio Johnson is he is what I called a J Hill special. And you're probably like, what's a J Hill special, Jake? What are you talking about here? The thing about Antonio Johnson, if you look at his offer list, it's not extensive. It's not like bloated with a bunch of Power 5 teams like some of the other commitments BYU has taken in this 2026 cycle. But what it is it's a kid, speaking of Antonio Johnson, who is a long, rangy athlete, listed at 6'4", 190 pounds. He's got the length you would think would be a premier for maybe a corner, but it looks like he's probably going to play safety for the BYU defense, and that's where Jay Hill absolutely plays a role because he's the safeties coach along with his defensive coordinator title. But if you look at his recruiting recently, he's brought in guys like Matthias Leach, Falatau Satuala, Tommy Prasis. Every single one of those guys stands 6'2" or taller. Gone are the days of BYU going with compact 6 foot, 220-pound safeties. 220 pounds probably over exaggeration, but you get what I'm talking about. They want long, rangy athletes who are able to cover the ground necessary in the single high defense that BYU plays, because guys like Tanner Wall right now, they're the last line of defense. If something breaks down in front of them, they have to clean it up. But also the other safety, speaking of the strong safety in this defense, they have to be able to play the run adequately, but also cover guys like tight ends. And having length like a guy like Antonio Johnson has here at 6'4", you can't teach it. And that's why I think Jay Hill absolutely craves adding guys like this. You look, like I said, you look at his offer list, it's a bunch of G5 and FCS offers, but the one thing that I can look at and say about Antonio Johnson is that he is going to come in and be trained up very, very clearly in this BYU defense, and Jay Hill will absolutely impart his wisdom upon him. But at the same time, he's not being asked to come in immediately and play right away. He's a 3-star talent, so he's not necessarily the headliner of this 2026 class. But Texas State, UTEP, Austin Peay are some of the offers he's had. Those are like offers you would think, okay, this is a guy that BYU recruited back in the day when it came to the independent era. Yeah, they would have, and they would have been lucky to have him. But I think Jay Hill sees one of those diamonds in the rough in this kid. And I think that he expects that when Johnson shows up on campus here, working with himself and obviously kind of getting engrossed in the weight room and doing what BYU does with their athletes, that in time, he's going to emerge on the other side as a really, really high-level athlete and a future cornerstone potentially of BYU's defense. I really do think this is one of those talents that, yeah, while the offer list may not look spectacular, and you probably got questions about why is BYU recruiting this guy. Well, look at it from the perspective of Jay Hill. He probably latched on to Antonio Johnson and was, okay, I found a guy. I found a guy who kind of floated under the radar, and we're going to get him here to Provo, and we're going to get him committed, and we're going to get him signed, and he's going to be a big part of the future of this defense. And that's exactly what it looks like here. That's what I love about guys like this, because Jay Hill, if there's one thing Jay Hill has earned in his relatively short time as BYU's defensive coordinator, is he is absolutely elite at identifying talent and then ultimately transforming it and letting it become a key part of his defense. And you can go back to his days at Weber State and look at the guys he brought to Ogden, trained up, and unleashed on the Big Sky. And there are just dozens upon dozens of them that were maybe a 0-star or a 2-star, or who knows what star they were when they showed up in Ogden. And over time at Weber State, they become the absolute dominant defensive players in Jay Hill's defense. He's done the same thing at BYU. So if Antonio Johnson is a guy that Jay Hill wants, take him. I'm all in on that. I will trust that Jay Hill, his evaluation process, what he looks for, markers that he wants in terms of the players he likes. This kid, speaking of Antonio Johnson, checks every box, it sure appears. And once again, if it's Jay Hill wanting a guy, I got no reason to argue with it, because his track record suggests that he sees something in this kid, and given the adequate time, preparation, and obviously Antonio Johnson buying in to what BYU is doing, I think that this is going to be a really, really nice pairing for BYU to have in their defensive secondary. I think this year you can probably pencil in a guy like Tanner Wall as starting free safety. You also probably have Raider Demooney penciled in as your starting strong safety. But then you also have Tommy Prassis probably backing up Tanner Wall, who I just talked about at 6'2", and then Falatau Satuala probably backing up Raider Demooney at that strong safety spot. And those are all homegrown talents that BYU wants to have and obviously unleash. And then Antonio Johnson coming in the 2026 class. Well, Tanner Wall's going to exit. I think Raider Demooney's got another year beyond that. Over time, the turnover at the safety room is going to give him an opportunity after maybe a redshirt year and time training in this defense to really emerge as maybe a sophomore and then be a force for this BYU defense. It sets up a really, really nice succession plan for Jay Hill at defense. And I will also add this. BYU wants to make Texas a base area of operations for them recruiting-wise, especially the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And getting a kid out of Fort Worth and Arlington Heights High School goes right in line with that. So I think this is a really, really nice pickup for the BYU defense. It checks a box of continuing BYU success in mining the Lone Star State for talent. BYU for years obviously used Hawaii and California to great effect, and they will continue to do so. But now that they're in the Big 12 and they're playing the likes of a Houston, of a Texas Tech, you have to go into the Lone Star State and get some of that talent out of that state, because simply put, Texas is way too big for all the Texas schools even to keep all the talent in state. It's absolutely insane to think of how much talent comes out of there. But BYU, the more they can do to scoop that talent up and bring it to Provo, I'm all for it. And I think that Jay Hill has absolutely crushed it in terms of going out and finding a high-level talent like an Antonio Johnson, who is very much flown under the radar. And I think over time will emerge as a really, really fun player to watch, because you cannot teach his 6'4", 190, and the speed he possesses. You watch that on film, you can't teach any of that. And obviously, with the college weight room, working in BYU with their sports science staff, you figure this kid probably emerges maybe 6'4", 210 pounds, prototypical type safety. Hey, I'm here for it, and I'm looking forward to seeing him in a Cougar uniform. All right, coming up here in just a moment, the second guy who was committed from visits this past weekend is Parker Ord. Now, Antonio Johnson doesn't have necessarily a really unique connection to BYU. Parker Ord, on the other hand, he has got, simply put, all the connections to BYU. You probably know the last name, but is this kid got the same type of skill as maybe his uncles had? We'll talk about who Parker Ord is next. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Another plug for you guys to join the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. Get the inside scoop on all things BYU sports. Just $5 a month to be a part of the group. But the kicker is you get a 2-week free trial, 14 days of unfettered access. And the best part is the updates come to your phone in the form of a text message. You don't have to log on to a website or go to a message board to get the inside intel that you crave. It comes to your phone and doesn't get much better than that. So sign up today. Link is in the show notes below, and hope that many more of you will continue to join us on the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. All right, let's talk about another commitment from the BYU football program this past weekend. That is Parker Ord. Now, that last name sounds familiar. It should. Now, Andrew Ord was a player for BYU from the late 90s to the early 2000s. I think Andrew finished up it was the Gary Croton era. I'm fairly certain. I think it was like 01 or 02 when he finished up. And as far as I am aware, Parker Ord is the nephew of Andrew Ord, but the Ord family has been in and around BYU football forever. And Parker Ord has everything that BYU wants in their offensive skill players. Now, he plays kind of a big hybrid wide receiver role for his high school down there in Texas. We talked about Antonio Johnson being a Texas product. Well, another one, speaking of Parker Ord, he is a guy that BYU absolutely looked at, evaluated, and I think there maybe was some question. He plays for Panther Creek High School in Frisco, Texas. He's kind of on the other side of the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex from where Antonio Johnson is from. But if you look at a guy like Parker Ord, he's 6'4", 210 pounds right now. He has plans to serve a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I think depending on how his body develops while he's out in the mission field, there's two ways it goes for him, in my opinion, at BYU. One, he stays kind of that wiry 6'4", 210 pounds that he is right now coming out of high school, and he ends up playing kind of that big wide receiver role. Think of a Chase Roberts. Think of Taron Houck back in the day. Also, Neil Pau'u. That's another one to think of. Guys who stood 6'3", 6'4", weighed maybe 210 to 220. Even Keanu Hill, who before he moved to tight end, Keanu Hill was 6'4", 210 pounds, 220, and BYU has shown they can have success with those guys. Parker Ord doesn't have elite speed, and that's nothing against him. It's just some guys aren't blessed with that type of speed, but he's very effective in his role. You look at the offense he played in at Panther Creek, and it's a very modern offense. A lot of shotgun formations, a lot of 3 and 4 wide sets where he kind of plays that inside wide receiver role, uses his size to his advantage, but at the same time, understands route concepts and when to get open and where to get open against man, against zone. I watched his highlight reel and I was enthralled with the way he attacked opposing defenses. And you guys are probably going to hop in the YouTube comments. Why are you not showing his highlights? For some reason tonight, StreamYard that I record this on wasn't letting me throw my huddle highlights up on it. I don't know why I have the issue. I've talked with our engineers about it, and hopefully they'll have an answer for me. But the bigger point is, speaking of Parker Ord, is he could stay at that wide receiver role and be maybe the next Chase Roberts type for BYU. Or if he's on the mission, and as most guys do, you can gain some weight and fill out your frame a little bit in the mission field. And yes, that may not be the best weight, but he could come home at 230 and maybe ultimately end up at 240, 250 pounds and be a tight end. Now, BYU's got other tight ends in this recruiting class. Brock Harris, Ty Getchie are also guys who have committed at tight end for BYU. But there's no reason to think that BYU can't get themselves back into the tight end business and do it with these trio that have committed in this 26 class. As I mentioned, Parker, he's got wide receiver skills, so he kind of maybe fits more in the mold of, I don't want to invoke this name because he's an all-time legend, but a Dennis Pitta type. He could be that type of a split out wide tight end. And I'm not saying that Brock Harris or Ty Getchie can't be that, because they've got the same type of skill. I think Brock Harris is absolutely incredible and is just he's one of one in my opinion. But Parker Ord, I think it really depends on how his mission goes and if he fills out that frame. If he does, great. He comes in and plays tight end for BYU, and you sort the details out later. That's what I love about this. And you can't ever have too many guys of his caliber, it feels like, in this program. He's another 3-star athlete, rated 86 by our friends over at 24/7 Sports. So a upper end of the 3-star rankings. This is not a 81, 82 guy. This is legit 86 and has played a really, really large role at top shelf high school football in the state of Texas. And if he can produce at that level, yeah, there's a thought that over time he will develop his frame and ultimately be able to contribute at a high level for the BYU football program as well. I really do think that BYU getting into Texas, as they've done here with Antonio Johnson and Parker Ord, it's a great thing for the Cougars to have those inroads made in the state of Texas. Obviously, Ord's got the family connection to BYU, and that helps. But I love the fact that he has got a ways to go in terms of his overall development as a player, but you can already see a bunch of the polish that he had at the high school level. All you got to do is just turn on the film. You're like, okay, yeah, this kid's got the goods. And I love the way he plays. And the other thing I like, he's physical. He didn't shy away. I saw a bunch of him stock blocking out on the perimeter on run plays for his high school. The best part is he engages guys. He goes after them. Some wide receivers will engage with guys, like it's kind of read and react, and they'll engage. Parker Ord like attacks dudes, and I can respect that as well, because if he ends up as a tight end, guess what? Knowing what I know of BYU's tight end room right now is if you can't block, you don't play, and that's a big part of what BYU wants from their tight ends, and his ability to already block on the perimeter as a wide receiver and relish that role, at least on his highlight reel from Huddle. The ability to go out, find guys, hunt them down, and make their life miserable. He had a bunch of pancake blocks on some of these corners that, yeah, he's bigger than, obviously, but that shows that he relishes that opportunity as much as he does catching touchdowns, getting a big play, and obviously on offense. But you have to also be a team player, and that's what Parker Ord shows in his highlight reel, is the ability, as I said, to go downfield, seek out guys he's supposed to block, and finish those blocks. As a former offensive lineman myself, I can respect guys like that, because too often it felt like some perimeter guys, or at least what I see on film, is that they'll engage. They engage pretty lightly. They're not necessarily as engrossed in the blocking elements as they should be. But Parker, to his credit, embraces all of it, and that will serve him well at the next level, because, as I mentioned, if you look at what BYU's offense requires from its tight ends, they want guys who are complete tight ends. They don't want to have just a pass catcher and blockers. They've had to use those in formations at times in the past just because they didn't have the same type of talent that they feel like they're going to have in future classes, especially in this 26 class with Brock Harris, Ty Getchie, and now Parker Ord. I think all three of them, given adequate time, resources, and obviously mission service, I think for all three, depending on when they go, etc., you can expect that all three of them will be well-rounded and ultimately should emerge as nice pieces for this BYU football program. And the other thing I'll say about tight end talents is, or guys who have frames like this, who are 6'4", 6'5", 6'6", and between 220 and 250 pounds, even if it doesn't work out at tight end, there's other positions you can try. Linebacker, defensive end. Like, it's not that you're going to be a tight end forever. If it doesn't work out of that position, they have the type of frame that translates over to other positions on the football field. I'm not saying it's going to happen for Parker Ord that he has to switch positions, but that also is a big reason why you recruit guys of his caliber, because you can find places to put them on the field that will help you win, even if it's not necessarily at tight end, or in the case of Parker, could it still end up at wide receiver? So really, really fine pickup. And yeah, having another Ord in the BYU football program for sickos like me, I'm all for it, because I did love watching some Andrew Ord back in the day in the late 90s and early 2000s. All right, that's going to do it for today's edition of the podcast. As always, thank you for all your support. I am probably going to take a couple of days off this week. I'm looking probably at doing a show tomorrow, taking Wednesday off at least, and maybe taking Friday off. But hey, if the news necessitates it, you guys know me. I love doing this podcast, and we will knock out as many editions of the show as we need to this week, but understand if I miss a day or two coming up later on in the week. But as always, truthfully, thank you for all your support. Thank you for being with us every single day, and thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars a part of your day and being everydayers right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.